Jesus spoke Hebrew, Busting the Aramaic Myth by Brent Minger. Introduction. This little book was not written for a market but from a passion for truth. For years the notion that Jesus' mother tongue was Aramaic has held total sway in scholarly circles. Even though the New Testament refers repeatedly to the Hebrew language, no competent scholar any longer holds the view that Jesus spoke Hebrew, wrote a bravely dissenting Harris Birkeland half a century ago. They all agree that his language was Aramaic, but that was then. Now an array of historical, archaeological, linguist and scriptural evidence, some only coming to light recently, makes the Aramaic assumption not merely suspect but downright untenable. Far from speaking Aramaic, Jesus can now be shown to have spoken Hebrew, just as we would expect of a Hebrew-born Messiah, making his initial appeal to the Hebrew people, the lost sheep of the house of Israel, on the basis of the Hebrew scriptures. This too was the position of the earliest church fathers, and that would be referring to the Roman Catholic church fathers, who taught that Hebrew and not Chaldee was the language of first century Judea. Thus the New Testament is again vindicated in our Saviour's true humanity as a Galilean Jew, authenticated. And his appreciation goes out to certain people. The author. Contents. One, Jesus spoke Hebrew. Well, we are going to verify that. He may have spoken Galilean Aramaic, being Galilean, and the Hebrew was regarded as Aramaic, and vice versa. Angus Kennett was in bed near the World Trade Centre when the call came. The son of a much-loved former Victorian Premier, he was unaware of the terrible tragedy unfolding there. September 11, I'm not going to cover that, going to skip that. Even God believes in wake-up calls. Awake, thou that sleepest, and Christ shall give thee light. In its own small way, this study sets out to be something of an awakener, sounding a trumpet blast against a widespread myth concerning the language that Jesus, the Son of God, spoke during his earthly ministry. Reputations have been built on maintaining this myth, but now the time has come to debunk it. Well, we're going to verify that he actually spoke Galilean Aramaic, which is Aramaic was probably regarded as Hebrew in their day. Hebrew Aramaic or Aramaic Hebrew, because they were sister languages and they had the same words, same meanings. Up until a century where the Masoretes added the Nakut, trying to make it easier to write and speak and so forth, and added vowels to the consonants, which changed not only the structure of the language but also the meaning of the words. So the original Aramaic and Hebrew then had similar words but with different meanings, i.e. Iyuma and Yom. One representing with a capital D the unmeasurable period that God created, the book of Brita or Genesis, and the secondary day, small d, indicating he did all in 6 literal days, say from a Friday to a Sunday, roughly. Misrepresentation. But does it really matter what language Jesus spoke? In one sense, no. He is still the Saviour of the world who walked on water, raised the dead and made atonement for our sins by his blood, whether he spoke Hebrew or Hindustani. And in another sense, it does matter. If your natural language is, say, English, and he goes about claiming it to be Dutch. You speak English, but someone says, no, it's Dutch. He's clearly misrepresenting you. While there is nothing whatever wrong with Dutch, it is a simple matter of fidelity to the record and of doing justice to the person. By the same token, if Jesus' mother tongue was Hebrew, well, it may not be if she was from Nazareth, of Galilee. She may have spoken Galilean Aramaic, as is all but universally held, as to say Churchill spoke in Spanish or Tolstoy wrote in Norwegian. But there is another issue at stake. Aramaic is nowhere mentioned in the New Testament, yet on numerous occasions it speaks of the Hebrew language in 1st century Judea. We've got to prove that wrong as well. That it actually is in the New Testament. From the title over Jesus' cross in Hebrew, John 19:20, to descriptions of places like Gabbatha and Golgotha in the Hebrew tongue, John 5:2, 19, 13, 17, Revelations 9:11, 16:16, to Paul gaining the silence of the Jerusalem crowd by addressing them in the Hebrew tongue, Acts 21:40, 22:2, to Jesus himself calling out to Paul on the Damascus road in the Hebrew tongue, Acts 26:14. In each instance, the Greek text reads Hebrew, Hebraeus, Hebraeos, or Hebraikos, probably in the Greek, the natural translation followed by nearly all the English versions, as also by the Latin Vulgate and the German Luther Bible. Do we have the right to insert Aramaic for this plain reading, particularly when the Jewish people of the period, as we shall see, were so insistent on distinguishing them? The evidence is compelling that we do not, and that the New Testament expression in the Hebrew language ought to be taken as read. Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, known to date from the same general period, reveal an overwhelming preponderance of Hebrew texts. The figure is generally accepted as around 80%, with Aramaic and Greek taking up most of the balance. In their comprehensive translation of the Qumran literature, Michael Wise and others observe that prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the dominant view of the Semitic languages of Palestine in this period was essentially as follows. Hebrew had died. It was no longer learned at mother's knee. It was known only by the educated classes through study, just as educated medieval Europeans knew Latin. Rabbinic Hebrew was considered a sort of scholarly invention, artificial, not the language of life put to the page. Spoken language of the Jews had in fact become Aramaic. The discovery of these scrolls swept these linguistic notions into the trash bin. The vast majority of the scrolls were Hebrew texts. Hebrew was manifestly the principal literary language for the Jews of this period. Well, temple-wise, everything holy it was, and Aramaic on the outside for everything else. Day-to-day matters, gossip, etc. The new discoveries underlined the still living, breathing, even supple character of that language, proving that late Second Temple Jews used various dialects of Hebrew. This sheer dominance of Hebrew goes far beyond the biblical writings, which actually comprise, by Emmanuel Tov's calculations, just 23.5% of the overall Qumran literature. And there's a note here, Emmanuel Tov, a Qumran origin for the Masada non-biblical text. Dead Sea Discoveries, 7-1, 2000, page 63 or something like that. It includes also the famed copper scroll written as Walter's notes in an early form of Mishnaic Hebrew, the day-to-day letters, where Hebrew says Milik is the sole language of correspondence, and its general commentaries and literature where as Black concedes Hebrew, it must be some person with that last name. Hebrew certainly vastly predominates over Aramaic. No wonder the scrolls are said to prove that late Second Temple Jews used various dialects of Hebrew, and not just as an artificial language, but a natural vibrant idiom, as the Encyclopedia of the Dead Sea Scrolls declares. How else can such extensive evidence of the Hebrew language be taken from commentaries to correspond from documents to daily rules? Likewise, with the 16 texts found at Herod's stronghold of Masada, all predating the fortress overthrow in 73. No less than 15 are definitely in Hebrew, with some doubt over the final one. Is it conceivable that Hebrew would have been used for ordinary communications? Biblical texts are again in a minority. If it was not the language of daily life, surely the burden of proof must lie with those who would argue otherwise. Moses Seagull. Well, before these scrolls and Masada provided the archaeological insights into Hebrew's place in late Second Temple language, Moses Segal had come to the same conclusion on purely linguistic grounds. Co-translator of the Talmud and winner of the Israel Prize for Jewish Studies, Segal was a Hebrew lexicographer of the first order. While still believing that Jesus, as a Galilean, probably spoke Aramaic, he was in no doubt that the prevailing Judean language of the time was Hebrew, as he already wrote in 1927. In earlier Mishnaic rabbinic literature, no distinction is drawn between biblical Hebrew and Mishnaic Hebrew. The two idioms are known as Lishon Haggadah, the Holy Tongue, and the opposite to that in Aramaic would be the Lishon Atika Sapreya. As contrasted with other languages, what was the language of ordinary life of educated native Jews in Jerusalem and Judea in the period from 400 BC to 150 CE? The evidence presented by Mishnaic Hebrew and its literature leaves no doubt that the language was Mishnaic Hebrew. Such is the observation of one of the outstanding Hebrew scholars of the 20th century, and editor of the Compedius Hebrew-English English-Hebrew Dictionary. For Segal, as for the Dead Sea scholars, there is no doubt that the language of ordinary life in first century Judea was Mishnaic Hebrew. It was the first language acquired by children in the home and the natural medium of communication and daily speech. As Millet earlier recognized, Mishnaic Hebrew was at that time the spoken dialect of inhabitants of Judea. What is going on? It is astonishing in light of this that the Aramaic assumption, at least as it pertains to the language of the first century Judea, still persists. As relatively recently as 1994, Angel Sainz Badios could claim in his major study, A History of the Hebrew Language, that the exile, i.e. 586 BC, marks the disappearance of the Hebrew language from everyday life and its subsequent use for literary and liturgical purposes. Only what is going on here? On the one hand, the clear archaeological and linguistic evidence from Hebrew's daily use in late Second Temple Judea, yet on the other a protracted scholarly denial of the same. No wonder Oxford's Edward Uhlendorf takes Sainz Badios to task. I cannot accept the author's novel argument cited above. This assumption would curtail the active life of Hebrew by about half a millennium. Of course, colloquial Hebrew will have changed somewhat, possibly as a result of external influences during the post-exilic era, but it no doubt remained the principal vehicle of communication. Time was when Sainz Badios' obituary for Hebrew as a living language would have held centre stage. The Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church spoke for virtually the entire scholarly world, Segal and Harris Birkeland, two notable exceptions. When in its first edition of 1958, it confidently stated that Hebrew had ceased to be a spoken language around the 4th century BC. Yet such was the mounting weight of evidence to the contrary that by its third edition in 1997 this had become Hebrew continued to be used as a spoken and written language in the New Testament period. This represents a remarkable about turn due to, not least, to the extensive publication of the scrolls in the intervening period. How fitting that from the lowest geographical region on earth, the Dead Sea, where death reigned even in its name, there should break forth from the dead, as it were, the vindication of Hebrew's primary place in the language of first century Judea, exactly as the New Testament consistently showed. Truly, this is the Lord's doing, and it is marvellous in our eyes. Psalms 118:23. So I'm going to go back and go look at those particular verses in Scripture that he quoted, this author quoted. Okay, we're going to have a look at John 19:20 from the original ancient Galilean Aramaic manuscripts, translated into the nearest English equivalent by a native-born Aramaic-speaking translator, Victor N. Alexander. Okay, does it say here that the Christ spoke Galilean Aramaic? Looking at that. Victor Alexander posted the entire Gospel of John online, it's a translation project, in the language Yeshua or Jesus the Messiah spoke. The ancient Aramaic Asherit, which is, or Galilean Aramaic, which is a derivative of the Ninevite Aramaic, he states. And he posted the audio for all the chapters. Should have been enough to prove that the ancient Aramaic scriptures are authentic by the very fact that the words kanuma, referring to the Trinity, and muta, manifestation, and not merely word, both appeared in the Gospel of John and were not translated in any of the other translations so far. And he goes on to say his translation of the New Testament is unique. On the internet is the only authentic translation of the original scriptures in any language. It just so happens that it is in English. If there was any other, he would have translated it into that as well. Looking for more information, that Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, spoke Galilean Aramaic. Okay, we're still looking for it. Nothing here, we can't see anything here. And this place is so green, it's very hard to see as well. Okay, go on to the second one here. So the first one here, okay. Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Christ, spoke Aramaic. Of course, this was 2,000 years ago. The language has evolved, and today it is like Old English. It sounds different. The ancient church of the East that emerged out of Jerusalem at the end of the Apostolic Age referred to it as Lishana Atika, or the Old Tongue, or Lishana Atika is a prayer, the sacred scribal language of God that he spoke to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. This translator calls it ancient Aramaic. It is still used in the liturgy of the Eastern churches. It is sung during Mass. There are some clergy that know how to read it. It comes in many dialects of the Middle East and Africa, of the Eastern churches, and of the Orthodox churches of some Eastern European countries. Nobody speaks this language anymore. The original ancient Ninevite Aramaic, right? This Asherit, this derivative. Not the ancient form of it. So you have a form of it, which is a form of the old, but it's not that original form. It's a different form, or as you might like to say, or know it as, a modern version or derivative. Those who claim to speak Aramaic are only speaking modern derivatives of the language, possibly Syriac or modern Galilean Aramaic. Just as nobody speaks Old English or even Middle English anymore. Nobody speaks Koine Greek, Old Norse, or Old German, or Old Germanic, and so on. These languages have all evolved, and so today no one finds, one also finds Hebrew and Aramaic spoken by millions of people in the Middle East, but these are modern versions or derivatives of the language. They're a form of the old form, but not the same form. The roots of many words are the same, however, and the old form can be learned, and that's what Victor Alexander did. So he could read the scriptures and translate them faithfully. Actually, the scriptures have preserved the ancient Aramaic language, and the language has preserved the scriptures. The Galilean Aramaic of the time of Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, was not the same as the Galilean Aramaic of today, nor was it like the Hebrew of today, even though both languages have evolved from the ancient Aramaic of that time. The Galilean dialect of the ancient Aramaic language of the time of Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, was the Ninevite Aramaic, today referred to as Asherit by even the major scholars of Judaism. So the New Testament was recorded in ancient Aramaic and later translated into Koine Greek, which is a form of Greek more akin to Aramaic. So when you translate it from the Koine Greek, it should be pretty close to the Aramaic, Galilean Aramaic, the Aramaic, because that's where it supposedly originated from. As it was heavily influenced by Aramaic. All human languages evolved out of the Lishana Articus prayer, ancient tongue or sacred scribal language of God. that was spoken in Mesopotamia thousands of years before the Bible was ever written. The Bible was written. However, Lishana Atika became the Lishana Sapreya, scribal language. This is the sacred scribal language of the scriptures, which the Hebrew prophets used and the apostles of Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, used. In fact, it is the language Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, read the scriptures from in all the synagogues and temples that he visited when he came to the world. This translation, Dean Alexander's translation of those original Galilean Aramaic manuscripts, etc., has been made from the Lishana Sapreya, the sacred scribal language of the scriptures. This is the only Bible, his is the only Bible that has been translated from scratch using this language as the source material. And it goes on about that. So that they're from a native-born Aramaic speaker from Mesopotamia, Syria, verifies that he spoke Galilean Aramaic. He's done the research. He's written quite a lot here. See what it says about Paul. Not much in regards to the Galilean Aramaic or Aramaic. Here, nothing. The significance of the ancient Aramaic language. One of the most sophisticated ways to deny the Creator's triune nature is teaching that the Old Testament was originated in Hebrew and that the New Testament was originated in Greek. Okay, that the Old Testament was originated in Hebrew and that the New Testament was originated in Greek. That's to deny it, to sophisticate it, especially the triune Godhead and the Creator's triune nature. This way, the variation in the pronunciation of the alphabet could be used as a tool to manipulate the meaning of the scriptures, words, and nobody would be the wiser, as it sounds logical that the prophets wrote in Hebrew and that Paul wrote in Greek, because the prophets were Jewish and the early converts were Greeks and Romans. It sounds logical, right? Well, Abraham came from Mesopotamia together with his wife Sarah. They spoke the ancient Aramaic of that early period, just as Noah, his wife and children had spoken the earlier version of the ancient Aramaic in Mesopotamia. They probably spoke Akkadian and Chaldean as well. Then there came Isaac, whose wife Rebekah was from Mesopotamia. She was a second cousin, and then Jacob married Leah and Rachel, who were also from Mesopotamia, who were also from the house of his great uncle. So they all spoke the same language, the ancient Aramaic. In the centuries that followed the life of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, there came the 12 tribes of Israel, which emerged out of Jacob's 12 sons. They all spoke the ancient Aramaic language. They all spoke it, but the script kept changing and the dialects kept evolving as language does, right? Over time. The Hebrew language then came from Mesopotamia. The word Avrai, or Hebrew, came from the word for Passover. The angel of Allah, or God, Aver, in other words, passed over the children of Israel in Egypt. He delivered them from death, Paisinum, or delivered them, and therefore, can't see that one's a bit small, Pisha, we believe that says Pisha, or deliverance. Pisha is now how the Jews pronounce the name of Passover, maybe that's Pisha, is how the Jews pronounce the name of Passover in Hebrew even today. The Hebrew script and dialect evolved out of the original ancient Aramaic language. That's why they're sister languages. One is older than the other. Why? Because this Aramaic was around way before that. These Hebrews, I think it was Genesis 11, Brita 11, 6 or something like that. They were a people who crossed over rivers, i.e. the Euphrates or the Tigris, to go to the land of Canaan. So they were peoples, not a language. Language wasn't developed until around about Isaac's time, Isaac's era, which wasn't that very far away. The actual script was modified after the time of Moses. The commandments were given to Moses in the ancient Aramaic because the ancient Aramaic was older than the Egyptian and it did not depict pictures of animals in its forms. However, the Hebrew script, which is familiar to people studying the Bible in the Hebrew, is a more recent development. It was invented to codify the scriptures, but it led to altered interpretations and therefore the present inconsistencies that resulted in the denial of Yeshua's triune essence, or Jesus' triune essence. This Hebrew apparently was revised in the early 1900s. So it's a modern revision of that Hebrew language. Looking for more on that he spoke the Aramaic. The mission of the disciples was to spread the teachings of Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah. They came from different backgrounds and probably had different accents or maybe even different dialects. The four Gospels were written in the ancient Aramaic language. Reading them in the original, it is clear that they had different styles. The writers had different vocabularies, like different novelists would have in modern times. Stylistically, they are all very well written. Paul was the most accomplished scribe among them. He had been a Pharisee, so it is to be expected that his writing was phenomenal, because he had that privilege, he had that opportunity to be well educated, etc. In writing, literature, etc. Okay, let's see if there's anything else on the Aramaic language. Okay, can't see anything here. So we're going to go to, did we do this one? You had a look at that one, it's a green one. So we're going to have a look at, what did he say? John 19:20. Okay, we're going to have a look at that to see if he actually spoke Aramaic or Hebrew. 19:20. Okay, 19:20. Okay. It was written thus: here is Yeshua Nusreya, which means the victorious, or Jesus the victorious. There's a footnote indicated. I'm pretty sure that's what it means. We'll have a look. Yeah, 19:19, the victorious. Here is Joshua Nisrael, King of the Jews. 20. In this page, many of the Jews did read, since the place where Joshua, or Jesus, was nailed to the cross was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. So this sign above his head was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Yeah, sure. But the highlight is, he didn't utter in Hebrew, Greek, or Latin. And the high priest said to Pilate, do not write that he was king of the Jews, except that he said that he was king of the Jews. 22. Pilate said, I wrote what I wrote. But the soldiers that nailed Joshua, or Jesus, to the cross, took his new garments and divided them between the four of them, one to each other, etc., etc. So that sign above his head was in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Because was it Mark 15:34 and Matthew 47:26, he says, El, El, my God, the Manasukthani, etc. He spoke in his native tongue, Galilean Aramaic. not Hebrew or Greek or Latin, even though there's Hebrew translations. But these are latter second to third generation Arabic Greek transliterations. So when you have a look at that particular verse where he says El El, the true name of God, or in your English Bibles or your Jewish Bibles, Hebrew Bibles, it says Eloi Eloi. Sure, that's correct, but the rest is not, because there's no way he would forsake his son nor us as believers. He basically cried out, why have you left me or abandoned me, okay, for my, what was my destiny, right? Okay, it may have it here. No. Okay, so we've just verified he didn't say anything in Hebrew. The sign above his head was in Hebrew, Greek and Latin. Okay, so we're going to look at the next one. He claims he spoke Hebrew. Okay, from the title of Jesus' cross in Hebrew, okay, it was in Hebrew, but he didn't utter in Hebrew, but he uttered in his native language, Galilean Aramaic. John 19:20. Two descriptions of places like Gabbatha and Golgotha in the Hebrew tongue. John 5:2. 19:13. Okay, let's have a look at that. Let's see if we can find 9. No. It's 5. It's Revelation chapter 9. So we will have a look at, what's this one? It's 19. We'll have a look at the Aramaic New Testament here of what this man has stated. So John 19:13. Actually, should be there. 19:13. We may have already covered it. Okay. As Pilate heard of the manifestation, or this revelation, this revealing of the Christ, he took Joshua out, and Pilate sat on the podium at the place called the Stone Pavement in Hebrew. Okay, so it's indicated there's something called the Stone Pavement. It's in Hebrew. So what is that? That's 13. 19:13. Stones. 19:13. 2 stones. Is called the little enclosure. And it was the Friday of the Passover, and it was about the 6th hour, and Pilate said to the Judeans, here is your king, and so forth. So it's just saying there that this place he took him to in the Hebrew, okay, it was called the Stone Pavement in the Hebrew. It is called the little enclosure. (1913:1) produced, 1913:2 in the footnotes. Stones, 1913:3. Literal modern usage retained in original Aramaic usage. Lip. So yeah, it's saying there it was the name of it in Hebrew, not that he said he spoke in Hebrew. Okay, about it. And 17, Revelations 9:11 and 16:16. Let's have a look at Revelations 9. 11. And they have a king over them, for he is the angel of eternal hellfire, whose name in Hebrew, in that dialect, is Abaddon, whose name in Greek is Apollyon. So it's not the Christ there speaking in Hebrew, okay? It's a Hebrew name. It's in the Hebrew language, the name of this demon, or this king over them, the angel of eternal hellfire, called Abaddon, whose name in Greek is Apollyon. (16:16). Don't think we actually looked at that one. 16:16. Okay, let's have a look at Revelation 16:16 in the new, the Aramaic New Testament. A second. 16:16. And they gathered to that place which is called in Hebrew Armageddon. Okay? And the seventh angel spilled his chalice on the air, and a great voice emerged from the temple that declared, "Here it comes." So it's in the Hebrew language. It's not the Christ speaking Hebrew or Yeshua Mashiach. Okay, it's this angel saying in Hebrew, because they probably spoke the Aramaic and the Hebrew, or it was regarded as Hebrew Aramaic, being both sister languages, possibly before the languages had the Nakud, the consonants inserted in it, which changed the structure of the language and also the meaning of the words between the two. So there were two languages used: one, the Hebrew for the temple and all things holy or related to God, and the Aramaic supposedly on the outside for all other things. So there were those two languages there. Where they were actually used in which geographical locations is up for debate, etc., etc. Go do the research. Okay, going back to this guy's book. And Paul gaining the silence of the Jerusalem crowd by addressing them in the Hebrew tongue. Acts 21:40, 22:2. Let's go to Acts 21:40. And as he gave him permission, Paul stood on the steps and waved his hand to them. And when they quieted down, he spoke with them in Hebrew, and he told them. So maybe these people spoke Hebrew. There's certain people that he was talking to, and he spoke it as well. Don't forget, they were given the power of the Holy Spirit to speak other tongues, other languages. So maybe naturally Paul spoke Hebrew as well. Apart from that, he spoke Hebrew and Aramaic, Galilean Aramaic. Okay, what was the other one? 16, was it? 21:16. And they came with us disciples from Caesarea. This is possibly Paul speaking here. And as they brought with them a brother from the first disciples, whose name was Manason, who was from Cyprus, to receive us in his home. So was this guy Greek? Pretty sure he said 21:16 in this book. Okay, 21:40 and 22:2. Okay, we'll have a look at Acts of the Apostles 22:2. Okay, that's the next one there, right? Okay, let's have a look at that. Acts 22:22. Acts 22:2. Is that 22:22? Just check that. 22:2. Okay. And as they heard him speaking with them in Hebrew, they listened to him attentively. And he said to them, I am a Jewish man, and I was born in Tarsus of Cilicia. That's Paul. Okay? I grew up in this town then at the feet of Gamaliel, and was thoroughly disciplined in the law of our ancestors. And I have been zealous for Allah or God, just as you all am, or all are. Yeah. So he's speaking to these people. Paul is speaking to these people in Hebrew. It's not the Christ speaking Hebrew. Yes, he called it to Paul on the road to Damascus in the Hebrew. As is written. Okay. So, is that check that again, so we're not wrong. 22:2, that's what he's specifically saying. Okay, we already covered that. He spoke to the people in Hebrew. So it's not saying that Jesus spoke to him there in Hebrew at 22:2, because Paul, as we read out, said to some certain person, I am a Jewish man from Tarsus of Cilicia, a well-known city in which I was born. I beg you allow me to speak to the people. Okay, it's Paul about to be taken away. And as Paul reached the entrance to the compound, he said to the commander, must be a centurion of that Roman army, if you will allow me to speak to you, he said to him, do you know Greek? And let's have a look here. Okay, so commanding officer, trying to see, verify if it's actually Roman. I'm pretty sure it is. Or maybe he's on the island of Cyprus. I forget exactly where he is. Okay. Judeans of Asia saw him in the temple, and they dragged the people against him and threw their hands on him. So they basically stirred up the people to grab him. And he cries out to the Israelites, lend us a hand. This man they cried out, this man teaches everywhere against our nation and against the law and against this country, and he brings in even the Arameans into the temple, and he defiles the sacred land. Whole city was stirred up, and all the people gathered and seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and in that very hour they locked the gate. So they basically threw him out, I suppose. And as the crowd wanted to kill him, the commanding officer heard that the whole city was rioting, and in that very hour he mustered a centurion, so it must be Romans, and many soldiers, and they attacked him, the crowd, right? And they saw the commander and the soldiers, the crowd saw them, and they released Paul from, they stopped from beating him up. And the commander reached him and arrested Paul, and he ordered them that they tie him with 2 chains, and the centurion asked, who is he, and what has he done? And people yelled out of the mob, this and that. And because he could not learn whether or not what they shouted was true, The centurion had no clue if they were telling the truth or lying. He ordered that they take him to the compound, and when Paul reached the steps, the soldiers carried him because of the mass of the people. They protected him, right? Picked him up and carried him. For a great crowd of people followed him, and they cried out and said, "Take him away." And as Paul reached the entrance to the compound, he said to the commander, "If you will allow me to speak to you," he said to him, "Do you know Greek?" Well, he's on Cyprus, I guess. I was pretty sure that's where they were. So I'm trying to look here again. Did you go to Jerusalem? Yeah. He asked him, "Did they speak Greek?" And then he was asked, "Are you the Egyptian that some days ago revolted and took out to the desert 4,000 men to commit evil?" He said, "No, I'm a Jewish man from Tarsus of Sicilia, etc." Okay, and then when he was given permission to speak, he stood on the steps. Paul stood on the steps and waved his hand to them, and when they quieted down the crowd, right, etc., he spoke with them in Hebrew, and he told them, yeah, whatever he was preaching to them, probably good news or whatever. Yeah. So there, Paul spoke Hebrew. So there's nothing there saying that Jesus spoke to him in Hebrew, if that's what this person here is saying. Okay, but on the road to Damascus, yeah, sure, he saw Jesus apparently, and he spoke Hebrew to him. That they may not understand that there's the Hebrew Aramaic. Sometimes they refer to the Hebrew, they refer to the Aramaic. So it could be something like that. Okay. Okay, it goes on about the Talmud. And Josephus. Okay, this guy would say that it was definitely the Hebrew that he spoke. It's distinguished, that Josephus distinguished between the Hebrew from the Aramaic, showing that it was Hebrew that was spoken in the first century Israel, of which he was largely a part. You'd have to go look at Josephus and verify that. Concerning this Hebrew tongue, he writes in another page, Josephus, though their script seemed to be similar to the peculiar Syrian or Aramaic, it's like writing in their language to sound like the other, it was, as it happened, of a distinct type. Idiotropon, Antiquities 12:2-1 Thackeray translation. So this person of Thackeray translated it. There's always that chance that he was incorrect. He's either right or incorrect. Thus elsewhere he writes the Sabbath in the Hebrew language. Antiquities 1:33, Adam in Hebrew signifies Antiquities 1:34, Israel in the Hebrew tongue. Antiquities 1:33, written in Hebrew books. Antiquity 9:208, the books of the Hebrews. Antiquities 10:218. It's difficult to see how the Hebrew language here can denote anything but Hebrew. Not only do the uniquely Hebrew connotations of Sabbath, Israel, etc. require it, but so too does the fact that at the time of Josephus, the only holy Hebrew books possessed by the Jews were the actual Hebrew scriptures. The Aramaic Targums, Job aside, not yet having come into being. So when we come to Josephus is addressed to his own countrymen from outside the walls of besieged Jerusalem, there can be no doubt as to what language he speaks. He addresses them, of course, in their own language, the Jews' own language, right? Or Josephus in the war, right? 5:9-2, which he explicitly states of the same episode to be the Hebrew language. Given the consistent meaning of Hebrew as real Hebrew, not Aramaic, elsewhere in Josephus, and the distinction he himself draws between the two languages, how can Hebrew be taken at anything other than face value? That is Josephus addressed to the Jews of around 69 AD. like Paul's address to the Jews of around a decade or so previously in the same city, where both, as the respective texts of Josephus and Acts state, in the Hebrew language, Acts 22:2. It's what he spoke to these people, the Hebrew language. Logic would further require that the only reason this was so, because the Hebrew language was the vernacular of Judean Jews at the time. Yeah, probably the Jews that were there, but not necessarily the language of the 12 disciples of Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, who were Galilean, Aramaic, or Galileans, fishermen, etc., who spoke Galilean Aramaic. Possibly why everybody else spoke Hebrew. But they probably had an understanding of Hebrew as well. We're not going to deny that. Maybe they used it as well. Jot and tittle. But what does this mean in terms of our inquiry to Jesus' language? A great deal, actually. Self-evidently, there is a nexus between the Jewish vernacular of the first century Israel and the language Jesus spoke. It would fly in the face of common sense if the Word made flesh addressed the very countrymen he was first sent to by his Father in anything other than their normal tongue. Yeah, but maybe it's exclusively for them, but they denied him. But he had these 12 faithful around him, so they were Galileans, so he spoke that language, and they wrote all in that language. Maybe. Okay, so here is the Yod. Jot refers to Yod, the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, possibly different to the Aramaic alphabet. Tittle is a slight serif or hook on a Hebrew letter that distinguishes it from another, the New Jerome Bible Commentary, emphasis added. So this guy is referring to the Greek, by the looks of it, as a backup. Likewise, John Broadus in his commentary on Matthew, just jot in the Greek, iota, signifies the Hebrew letter iod, pronounced yod. Tittle in the Greek, horn, denoting a very slight projection at the corner of certain Hebrew letters, emphasis added. Would Jesus have used such a term, indeed two of them both referring to the Hebrew letters of the Hebrew alphabet, if his immediate audience did not understand Hebrew? Would a French speaker addressing his or her own countrymen today use the umlaut of the German Bible to illustrate a point? Hardly. The most obvious conclusion is that as Jesus was referring to the Hebrew alphabet, which no one disputes, his hearers must have understood that same alphabet. Otherwise the point would have been lost on them. Logically, therefore, Jesus must have been speaking Hebrew and his audience must have understood him in Hebrew. Well, who knows, because the Aramaic and the Hebrew are sister languages at that particular time. Okay? They may have not yet been had the vowels added to it and it was changed. The language, the structure of the language was made different. It may not have been like that. Okay? Or there might have been variations in the languages, but they basically understood each other. Should it be objected that as the Hebrew and Aramaic alphabets were the same, Jesus could just as well have been referring to the Aramaic alphabet? We would respectfully reply that this is to miss the point. Jesus expressly says the jot and the tittle of the law, therefore being but one law in Israel. The Hebrew Bible, even the Talmud declares, the Torah is in Hebrew. Sepharim 35a. Well, he could go either. He could say to the people that of the Torah or the Talmud or Mishnah, Torah, whatever, he could relate it to them, just like his parables. So they could understand it. They would understand it because of the root words, possibly something like that. Similar root words. Exaggerated influence. But what of Jesus' reference to mammon in the same sermon? Well, that's Greek, isn't it? Matthew 6:24, because the actual Aramaic word is mamoth, M-A-M-O-U-T-H, possessions, wealth, etc., etc. So there's a slight difference there. This mammon is Greek. Okay, we believe. Mamuth is the Aramaic. This is no difficulty. Loan words frequently occur between languages, as with Italian words like pizza and pasta today in English. There is no reason why Hebrew should be any exception. Yet we must be aware of reading too many Aramaisms into New Testament. In a parallel context, Segal observes that Aramaic influence on the Mishnaic Hebrew vocabulary has been exaggerated. It has been the fashion among writers on the subject to brand as an Aramaism any infrequent Hebrew word. Most of the Aramaisms are as native in Hebrew as they are in Aramaic. That's what he claims. Even the very term Mishnaic Hebrew can, through overuse, become an historical exaggeration, as though Second Temple Hebrew were a different species from normal Hebrew, an inevitable result of emphasizing small differences rather than recognizing greater commonalities. Just as Elizabethan English and modern English are still, whatever their differences, both English, so Biblical Hebrew and Mishnaic Hebrew are likewise both Hebrew. But then you've got the Elizabethan English, right, like Victorian English. It's like, oh, by Jove, they do say old chap, like that sort of posh, the Elizabethan English. And you had the modern English, okay, which is not the Queen's English. So there might be a slight difference there. The commoner's English. That you would have to ask a native-born Brit or Englishman. Demolished. In New Testament studies, and over-exuberance for Aramaic at first led C.K. Barrett to attribute a quotation in John 12:40 to Aramaic influence, only to change it to Hebrew in his commentary of 8 years later. Luke 6:7-2 was once held by scholars like Black, Fitzmyer and Wilcox to be an Aramaic construction, found nowhere else in the Greek of the period. Subsequently, J.A.L. Lee demolished this in a study, a non-Aramaism in Luke 6:7, citing no less than 23 parallel constructions in Greek literature of the period. Time and again the Aramaic assumption has turned out to be a lemon, prompting Semitist Kenneth Kitchen to observe that some Aramaisms are actually Hebraisms in Aramaic. What is more, merely because a word does not appear in the Old Testament Hebrew Bible does not automatically make it a candidate for the Aramaic club. Hosanna and Gehenna are words not found in that form in the Hebrew Old Testament, yet both occur in Mishnaic Hebrew and are found in identical form in the modern Hebrew dictionary. Yet they were once claimed to be Aramaic, and even if originally they were, so what? Restaurant and serviette are good French words, yet today they are well and surely part of standard English. Besides, as Glenda Abramson has noted, there were some 20,000 words in Mishnaic Hebrew as against some 8,000 used in the Old Testament Bible. Thus there is statistically a 2.5 times greater likelihood that a Hebrew word will not be found in the Old Testament, yet still be a regular part of the Hebrew language of the New Testament period. So the days are gone for the reflex assignation of Aramaic to any New Testament Semitism not found in the Old Testament. Ghost words. That this vice of seeing Aramaisms when they are not really there is still disturbingly with us can be seen from Michael Sokolov's penetrating review of the highly respected Koheler Baumgartner Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, and he writes about that. Okay, so you'd have to look at this person, this author, okay? You have to look at his history, his background, to see if he's a native-born Aramaic-speaking theologist, etc., etc., because he really wouldn't have any clue if he's not a native-born. He may think he has a clue if he goes to some seminar, learns it through courses, university, whatever. He's still not fluent in it. That's the difference. So we would have to look at that particular guy's history to see what he was about. Okay. Here's a thing we found on Wikipedia. There exists a consensus among scholars that Jesus spoke Aramaic. Aramaic was a common language of Roman Judea and was thus also spoken by at least some of Jesus' disciples. Galilean Aramaic, because they're Galileans. Fishermen. The villages of Nazareth and Capernaum in Galilee, where the Gospels record him as having been raised, because his mother was a Nazarene, so she was Galilean, right? She was born in Nazareth, so she's a Galilean. Were populated by Aramaic-speaking communities. Jesus probably spoke the Galilean dialect, distinguishable from that which was spoken in Roman-era Jerusalem. So what's the difference here? Galilean dialect, the form of Jewish Palestinian Aramaic spoken by people in Galilee during the classical period, for example at the time of Jesus and his disciples, as distinct from the Judean dialect spoken in Jerusalem. Okay, so let's have a look at that one. That which was spoken in Roman era. Okay, doesn't really say much there. Would be a slight difference, right? Galilee was known for its trade routes and for its interface with the wider spectrum of Hellenism. That's what the Greeks were called originally, the Hellenes. In classic antiquity, the Hellenistic period covers the time in Greek, Eastern Mediterranean and Middle Eastern history following classical Greece, between the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC and the death of Cleopatra 7 and 30 BC. Okay, Matthew 4:15 references Galilee of the Gentiles. As such, the Gospels understand Jesus' youth in Nazareth to be in a highly cosmopolitan area in which Greek was used frequently, 10 kilometers (6.2 miles) from the meeting of several major trade routes in Sepphoris. It is thus likely that Jesus was able to work in Koine Greek. Is that possibility? Because he's divine, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that he spoke Koine Greek or wrote in Koine Greek. As a carpenter, yeah, he may know that, and also being Jesus the Christ. So he may have had a few customers if he was selling tables and stuff. Additionally, given that Hebrew had continued to be used by Judeans who were left behind during the Babylonian captivity, Babylonia, what's that, Mesopotamia? So they may have picked up the Aramaic from there, and is Assyrian Aramaic or whatever, and is understood to be the language of composition for several canonical texts composed in the Second Temple period. Jesus was conversant in the Hebrew spoken among the Samaritans, according to John 4. Jesus was thus well versed in biblical Hebrew. Okay, so there's always that option there that he knew both. Beyond its use as a liturgical language of Second Temple Judaism, cultural and linguistic background, Dead Sea Scrolls, Josephus. In the 1st century AD, the Aramaic language was widespread throughout the Middle East, as is supported by the testimony of Josephus, the Jewish War. Okay, and there's plenty more information on that. Yeah, so you have to take this guy with a grain of salt and lots of pepper. So it's got here is what are we to make of this in terms of Jesus' repeated encounters with the Samaritans? Must the stilted explanation be invoked that he switched languages? Is it not more natural and certainly more consistent with the evidence to accept that as they spoke Hebrew, about which there can be no doubt, so did Jesus? Yeah, possibly. Thus, this is confirmed by the fact that the Samaritan woman in her conversation with Jesus used the Hebrew term Messiah. Yeah, is that from the Hebrew, or is it from his Galilean Aramaic, or something else? John 4:25. Let's have a look at that. John 4:25. That woman told him, I know that the Anointed One is coming, and when he comes, he will teach us everything. Okay, does it say that he spoke to her in Hebrew? If she was a Samaritan? Okay, hold on. What should she say here apparently? Hebrew term Messiah, John 4:25. That woman told him, I know that the Anointed One is coming, and when he comes he will teach us everything. So it's not saying there that he spoke to her in Hebrew. In the Aramaic New Testament translated by Victor and Alexander, it doesn't say that. See? Where did she say there? Where did she use the Hebrew term Messiah? Let's go back a bit. Let's go further up. Okay, where did she say that? Okay, still looking for that. Nope, there's nothing there we can see that she said the word Messiah. It's probably in your modern versions, and that's where this guy's getting it from. The Greek translations into English. There's no term there. This is confirmed by the fact that the Samaritan woman in her conversation with Jesus used the Hebrew term Messiah. That's John 4:25 we're looking at. I'm pretty sure that's John 4. Just check that back again. Oops, we're in the wrong one, we're on Luke. So she may have said it, so we're going to go John. No, we're sure we're in the right place. John 4. Where's this one? Luke. I'm sure that's the right one. You see our pages have slipped out? Yeah. We think our pages are missing. Okay. Righty, where did they go? Must be at the front here. Ah, here we go. Yes, because our book is falling apart. Our version is falling apart, that's why. Okay, let's have a look here. John 2. John 3, John 4, let's see what we got there. 4:25. Okay, 4:25. Is that John 4:25? We're sure it is. That's what he says there. John 4:25. We're looking at John 4:25. There arose a question between one of the disciples of John and a Jew over ceremonial washing. Sure that says John 4:25. Just going to put these pages back in order. They've fallen out. We're pretty sure that's what it says. What is was this one? Luke. Okay. John 4. This one. 3. Yeah, it's definitely 4:25. So let's look at that again. John 4:25. Yep, John 4:25. There arose a question between one of the disciples of John and a Jew over ceremonial washing. So where is this woman who supposedly says he's the Messiah? It's not there. Okay. Let's have a look. Let's prove that. Acts. Index page. Okay. 4:25. I'm pretty sure we're right, but we'll just do this just to check, so I'm not putting you wrong. 4:25.
John chapter 4.
Okay, can you be quiet for a minute? Thank you very much. Okay, 4:25. Ah, here it is here. So what was that one we saw? Okay, 25. That woman told him, that Samaritan woman, I know that the Anointed One is coming, and when he comes he will teach us everything. Yeshua told her, I am the one who is speaking with you, and as he was speaking the disciples returned. Okay, so it's saying there that woman told him, I know that the Anointed One, which would hint at the Nashika, not the Messiah, not the Greek. Okay, in this particular translation of the Galilean Aramaic, it wouldn't say Messiah, it would say Mashika. Okay, or whatever she would have said in her language, Samaritan. So let's go have a look and see what Samaritan, what Messiah is in Samaritan. Looks like it's Tahib. Yeah. In Samaritan belief, the Messiah is referred to as the Tahib, which means the restorer or the one who returns. The Samaritans view the Tahib as a prophetic figure who will restore the authentic religion and bring them back to God, similar to the role of Moses. So let's ask the question, was the woman speaking to Jesus in Samaritan or Hebrew? Or even Aramaic? The woman was speaking in Samaritan, which is a dialect of Hebrew, but the conversation is recorded in Greek in the Gospel of John. Yeah, that's in the Greek transliteration or translation, right? The cultural context suggests that they likely communicated in a language familiar to both, possibly Aramaic, which was commonly spoken in that region at the time. Okay, it's a dialect of Hebrew, a derivative. Okay, but it's not suggesting there that it was. that she spoke to him in Hebrew, more than likely Aramaic. But it's recorded in your modern Bibles from the Greek, or in the Greek, into your nearest English equivalent. Okay? So she would have referred to the Messiah, or the Mashiach, as Tahib, if they were speaking in the Samaritan language, because she was a Samaritan woman. And you would have understood it being Jesus the Christ, right? Or the Messiah, or Mashiach. Not the Hebrew. Okay, let's listen to what Victor in Alexander
The
used to say.
Pharisees had heard that he was making many into disciples, much more than John, even though it was not Esau himself who was doing the baptizing, but his disciples.
Skip it here a bit.
Your living waters from? Why are you greater than Jacob, who gave us this well, from which he drank, and his sons and his herds? Esau replied and told her, whoever drinks of these waters will thirst again. Whoever drinks of the waters that I have will never thirst again, except that the waters which I give will become a well of waters inside you. That will well out and lead to eternal life. Then the woman said to him, my Maria, give me of these waters, so that I may neither thirst nor have to come here for drawing water again. 16. Esau said to her, go and call your maid, and come back here. She said to him, I do not have a maid. Esau told her, how nice you say that you do not have a maid. For you have had 5 maids, and the one you have now is not going to be your maid. This much you said truthfully. Then the woman said to him, my Maria, I see you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped at this mountain, and yet you say that in Jerusalem is the rightful place to worship. Esau told her, woman, believe me, the hour will come that neither at this mountain nor at Jerusalem they shall worship the Father. You worship the things which you do not know. We worship what we know ourselves, that life came from the Jews. Except that the hour is coming, and it is now, when the faithful worshippers worship the Father in spirit and truthfulness. For the Father also wants worshippers such as these. Allah is a spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and faithfulness. That woman told him, I know that the Mashiach is coming. I know that the...
See, notice he said the word Mashiach. He didn't say Messiah from the Greek. Yeah? It says here in the English, the anointed one, but he stated Mashiach. Okay, from the Galilean Aramaic, or the Aramaic.
The Father also wants worshippers such as these. Allah is a spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and faithfulness. That woman told him, I know that the Mashiach is coming. I know that the Anointed One is coming, and when He comes, He will teach us everything. Esau told her, I am the one who is speaking with you. And as he was speaking, his disciples returned.
So that basically states that he didn't say Messiah. He was speaking to in Aramaic, possibly in Aramaic, not Hebrew. Don't forget she was a Samaritan, but it's a derivative of the Hebrew. So she may have spoken to him in Aramaic. And you heard the voice of the translator Victor Alexander use the word Mashiach, or Mashiach, sorry, not Messiah of the Greek, or the Mashiach of the Hebrew. Okay, so we hope that this video has opened your eyes to being very careful what people tell you. Okay, what's been written in books, what they try to convince you. Oh, Jesus wasn't a Jew. Okay, he was under the Jewish precepts, customs, etc., etc. Sure, it was Galilean Aramaic. Oh, Jesus this, Jesus that. You just have to be really, really careful, because these are people who you think they're experts, etc., who claim to be and claim to know this and that, undermine this and that, and are pro this and that, when they're actually wrong. Yeah, they're incorrect. It's all in the wording. So, if you like this, as we just stated, subscribe to our channel, give us a like, add your comments below the video, and then go share it with all of those you know. Tell them about us, the Ministry of the Real Truth, and how we are bringing to you the real truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth of what the biblical scriptures actually say and mean.